Nigel, it's a real pleasure, and it's an honour to be here for everybody to listen to Mike, and I just want to welcome you all, and I hope that this is an informative evening, and we're really excited to hear Mike's speech shortly. As you hopefully know, this book is also to support safe passage, and just to start the evening, just to going to hear a little bit about Safe Passage charity, to learn about them, as £1 from each book purchase will support the charity. So Isabelle, is that good for you to come and say a few words? You're expecting it, right? I think.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having us here this evening. I'm Isabelle and this is Ali, one of our young leaders. And thank you to everybody at Lemon Soil and to Mike for choosing Safe Passage as the charity that you'd like to support with your book. And this partnership really means a lot. You know, it's 80 years since the Kindertransport, and you know, sadly, we're still very much seeing the need for safe passage for young people fleeing danger. So, you know, this the proceeds from this book are really, really crucial in helping safe passage and our work continue, and making sure that more children and more young people can reach a place of safety. Thank you. So just before, as a quick kind of terminology, we see the word refugee used a lot in the press, and it often isn't used particularly nicely in the press. So just for a quick UNHCR definition, a refugee is somebody who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. And I think what's important to remember is that it doesn't discriminate. Anybody from any country and any background is still a refugee. So why do we need to help? Currently, there are about 36 million refugees, probably higher actually, considering I've just read that there are 10 million people who've left Ukraine in recent weeks. Half of these are under the age of 18, and many of them face danger, even more danger than the ones, well, not more danger, but they're fleeing danger, and along the way there are innumerable risks, abuse, risk of trafficking. I read recently there was a study that 18 children per day go missing in Europe. And I'm already reading that a lot of children on the borders of Ukraine are at risk of kind of abuse. So Safe Passage exists to make sure that none of these children have to risk their lives further than what they already have done. So the current context, where we're at right now, it's actually a very kind of crux point at the moment, as the Nationality and Borders Bill is being read tomorrow in the House of Commons. But effectively, when the UK left the European Union at the end of 2020, the only kind of existing safe route that existed was revoked, as it was the EU Dublin regulation. And now we have to make immigration applications for people seeking a place of safety through something called UK immigration rules, or entry clearance. And it takes a lot longer and is a lot more of a kind of an arduous process than the EU route that we had before. And the Nationality and Borders Bill that's being proposed at the moment will actually remove any safe routes to the UK. It will remove family reunion, which was crucial for so many, a lot of the children back in the Kindertransport had family here, but that's going to be removed. And finally, anyone who arrives here in a way deemed illegally will be punished. So whether that's through an irregular route rather than a safe route. And yeah, as I've said, the recent tragedies in Afghanistan and Ukraine have really highlighted the need for safe passage for so many people. So where do safe passage come in? effectively, we exist to make sure that no child should have to risk their lives to flee danger. They should have a safe route to reach sanctuary. So in 2021, so last year alone, thanks to Safe Passage, 111 children were able to reach the UK and also be reunited with their families. We engaged and challenged MPs to fight the Nationality and Borders Bill. Crucially, just last week, actually, Lord Alf Dobbs, who himself came on the Kindertransport and who sadly couldn't be here today because he is in the House of Lords as we speak, he launched an amendment in the House of Lords last week for family reunion, and it won the majority of the votes, which is really great, and hopefully this reflects when it goes back to the Commons this week. Last year we also took the Home Office to court to argue that their family reunion policy from 2020 was unlawful. We didn't win on all points, but we did win on many, and crucially it meant that a lot of children who had their cases kind of thrown out in this 2020 policy were able to have a second chance of applying and were able to reach the UK. And finally, at the end of last year, we set up an Afghan pro bono initiative which would offer legal assistance and visa advice to the many Afghans now seeking safety in Europe and the UK. And I heard this morning that we've taken on 80 cases so far, which is really great. And we're currently scoping out how best we can use our expertise to react to the current situation in Ukraine. So I will now hand over to the wonderful Ali, who is one of our young leaders, who will tell you a bit about his experience as a young leader and the importance of safe routes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And hi everyone. My name is Ali, and I am one of the Safe Passage young leaders. So what we do in the Safe Passage is, as a leader, we are gathering weekly, and we are talking about the future issues and issues in the past. As she said, we spoke about Afghan refugees who fled from Afghanistan, or before that from Syria. And we are writing letters to MPs and to Lords if there is a case that we want to discuss with them. So we had a meeting with the House of the Lords, and we told them why is it important for the UK and for the refugees to have a safe route to come to the UK, and why we should open a safe route, because if you pay the smugglers, your life is at risk. So there are many refugees who are die on their way to the UK, and we don't want that anymore, as already many people have died. So that's what we do. We write a letter to MPs and Lords, and we discuss what we want to do in the future. I would like to talk about why the safe route is important. So as I mentioned, there are lots of people who are losing their life on their way to the UK, and there isn't any safe route to follow. So in the past, someone like Lord Alf Dobbs, he sat on the train, he came here legally because there was a safe route. Or right now, there are safe route for Ukrainians to go to the Europe or come to the UK. But there isn't any safe route for other people. If you're a refugee from, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, Palestine, Ethiopia, you can't come. There's not any safe route to follow. People are losing their life because there isn't any safe route to follow. And there are also people, they are humans like you, like us. So it is very important for them to have a safe route as well, and safe country, so they can be there. And and I would like to say that me as a person, I would like to be treated like everybody else. So if there's a safe route for Ukrainians, I would like there to be a safe route for other people as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So really, I'm just going to introduce Mike and say, I think the smallest amount about Lemon Soul is that it's a project that was Johnny Zucker's idea, dream project, who wanted a space, I think, for publishing just to be a good space, really, just to be honest and try and produce try and look after everybody in the process and the journey of book creation. Johnny wrote fantastic children's books. We've re-released Strikey Boy and other ones, and then really this came along as a consequence of Strikey Boy being a campaigns-based book. We raised money for Mind and on the back of that, and I just really heard Mike speak pretty much by chance at Limud, and I didn't know a lot about Rabbi Schoenfeld and the stuff, but I was just immediately hooked in and drawn in to his kind of maverick style, and Mike kind of said, he sort of mentioned I'd quite like to get the book published, and talked about how he's a historian. He spent 20 years in the archives, digging around calling himself a bit of a sleuth or a detective doing this stuff. And I just thought this is just one of those chances where I seem to love this guy. He's doing brilliant stuff, and if this is a chance to take some of this material and make it accessible in a form that can entertain on some level, but really educate, inform, and have really positive messages for us now, then that's great. And it's just really a privilege to listen to Mike, and we're surrounded by some very special people tonight that I hope we can hear from that have travelled all sorts of distances. And I recognise that, and thank you. And just look forward to hearing from Mike now, and welcome to the stage. So thank you.
Thank you, Nigel, for those lovely words, none of which I wrote, actually. It's a really privilege to see so many people here, very few of whom are family, so that's very nice as well. It's a real first for me. I've been a contract writer, freelance writer, about 25 years now, I think. I was a teacher before that. And up to now, most of the books I've written have been for publishers, the books that they want to be written by a kind of contract writer. So you probably read some of my previous great works, like The History of Concrete. I think my masterwork was, and Nigel will appreciate this, Let's Go with the Children in Essex, which came out in 1989. But this is the first book that is a book that I wanted to write because I felt very passionate about the subject. And it's just unreal, really, to see it actually here in print. With a publisher like Nigel and his fantastic team, with Sue, my wonderful editor, and all the people that helped me write this book. So where did it begin? This is, of course, not by any stretch of the imagination the first book about the Kindertransport. Really, since probably Karen Gershen's book in 1966, that was the first book written about the Kindertransport. They Came as Children, I think it was called. And it was a fantastic book. It was a set of memoirs, memories of people who were still around in the 60s who came as young children. And it is a fantastic book, one of the best, I think, ever written. Then there was a bit of a lull, to be honest, in Kindertransport research and certainly in Kindertransport publishing till the late 80s. When you probably remember, or some of you may remember, the programme That's Life with Dame Esther Hanson. She wasn't a dame then, but Esther Hanson. First highlighted the work of Sir Nicholas Winton. Do you remember that? Yeah. And it really came to, Nicholas Winton was associated with the Kindertransport really from then on. A name that was always in the press, horribly called the British Schindler, some of the press likes to call him, which he hated, by the way. I got to know him quite well as well, and he hated all that kind of fuss and limelight. And then really from the 1990s onwards, a spate of memoirs, not least actually in the 1980s, one of the first and one of the greatest memoirs by Vera Gissing, Pearls of Wisdom. Vera sadly died a day or two ago, and her obituary is in today's newspapers. She was became a great friend of Nicholas Winton, and she explained the process of what it was like to come as a child to a strange country, not speaking the language, not knowing the culture, not having any family here. Many of the Kinder didn't have family here. And that was followed by, dozens probably, of Kindertransport memoirs like that. So is there a place for my book, or our book, I should say? Is there a place for our book? And I think there probably is, because, first of all, as I say at the beginning of the book, Nicholas Winton played a very, very important role in the Kindertransport, but it was certainly by no means the only role that was played by many, many others. And I've subtitled the book Unsung Heroes of the Kindertransport. We agonised, the publishers and I, about the word heroes. Is a hero someone should really risk their life to do what they did? And some did, but most didn't. How do you define a hero? But I think those who stand up for others, those who put themselves out, those who make room for complete strangers to come into their lives, in my book anyway, and certainly in this book, I would regard them as heroes. So the more I think about it, the more I think that was a good choice, particularly the publisher to use that subheading. The book really is a book that faces the big question. Nicholas Winton, God bless him, wonderful man, was responsible for a team that brought out 669 children from what was then called Czechoslovakia, now called the Czech Republic, whatever you want to call it. It was the Czech lands around Prague. And Vera, for instance, alongside many others, were Jewish children who'd come from the Prague region. However, he was not, and I say this whenever I give a talk, 10,000 children came on the Kindertransport. Hold that figure in mind, 10,000. He rescued 669. Now, I failed O-level maths, but with a calculator, I worked out that that was about 6% of the entire Kindertransport rescue. So if he rescued 6% of the Kindertransport rescue, who rescued the other 94%? And when I started digging into who the people were who were behind the particular German-Austrian rescue, they were names that really at that point didn't mean anything to me at all. Now they do, of course, but then when I first came across it, didn't mean anything. You know, names like Gertrude Weissmuller-Meyer, names like Wilfred Israel, names like Helen Bentwich, names like Alan Overton. These are names, I think, that will be unfamiliar to you, it sounds horribly pluggy, until you read my book. Because some of them were absolutely crucial. In the two stages in which I described the book, one is, what was the organisation behind the German Kindertransport? Nicholas Winton was never involved in the German side at all, only the Czech side. So what was the organisation behind the rescue from Berlin, from Vienna, and many of the cities in Germany and Austria, which of course annexed in March 38 onwards. And what I discovered really is what newspapers really hate the most, which is there was no one hero, one name that could be attached as the British Schindler. It was in fact a vast organisation, both at the German and Austrian end, of both Jewish and non-Jewish agencies, often involving the Quakers at the German end and the Austrian end, and a huge number of people at the British side as well. And so once I started digging into the history of the organisation of the Kindertransports, rather than the memoirs, blessed memoirs of the Kinder themselves, a different kind of history started to emerge. And one that kind of challenges, I think, are, if we have any understanding of what the Kindertransport was, it does kind of challenge where you're sitting. One example, I'll give you one very small example, is that in 1937, in May 1937, a year before the Kindertransport even began, there was another Kindertransport of 4,000 children, but this time from the Basque region of northern Spain. They were, if you like, a kind of forgotten Kindertransport of children who came from, were fleeing from the advance of General Franco's armies during the Spanish Civil War. And Britain took in 4,000 Spanish children. In one go. They all came on one ship, by the way, a ship that was kitted out for 800 passengers, had 4,000 children on it. 1937, health and safety didn't mean what it does today. And one of the many forgotten names behind that Kindertransport was a lady called Leah Manning. Oh, my blank name. Was called Leah Manning. She'd been a Labour MP. She was a kind of fiery lady who didn't take no for an answer, even though, guess what, the government said no. We're not taking children from the Spanish Civil War. because this would look to Franco as if we're taking sides. However, what I discovered in uncovering Leah Manning's story, and people like Leah Manning, like my personal heroine, who's in the book, Catherine, Duchess of Atholl, you had this remarkable twin combination of this fiery left-winger, Leah Manning, a sort of Barbara Castle of her time, with this high Tory, high-born Duchess of Atholl, living in a castle, Blair Atholl in Stirlingshire, very, very high-born, high Tory, and yet they got on sort of like a house on fire, more fire than house. And between them, they helped bring in a team of people, not just them, but a team of people all over the country to set up Basque refugee committees around the country to bring the children in. This was against the government's advice, and Leah Manning and Duchess of Atholl said, well, we don't care what the government are going to say, we're going to bring them in anyway. And the government did yield after a time. But what that interestingly brought to my attention was that there had been then a precedent for the Kindertransport. And many of the people, in fact, involved in the Basque rescue, not least the Duchess of Atholl, were also very interested in the rescue of Jewish children a year later from Nazi Germany, and particularly after the Kristallnacht pogrom in November 1938. So there is a kind of link there, which I think, I'm not saying I'm the only one to have made that link, but certainly it was one worth illuminating. One of the many things that I illuminate, hopefully, about the Kindertransport. One of my best things when people read the book is, I never knew that. That's a marvellous thing, because of course if you did know that, there'd be no point in me writing the book. So it's really nice to hear that. The other thing which I think is very important, and it brings us back to what our two guests were saying before about safe passage, was that much of the rescue, much of the welfare of the children, once they were here, were provided by volunteers. They were, as you rightly say, given a safe passage. Reluctantly, it was not open-armed, open-hearted government, let's bring in as many as we can, and that had to be struggled against. But eventually, the Home Secretary, Samuel Hoare, did allow an unlimited number of children in through the safe passage via Germany, Austria, Holland, Hook of Holland, Harwich, Nigel from Harwich here, from my colleague at the Harwich Memorial Committee, which Mike says a bit more later, and then to Liverpool Street in London and dispersed around the UK. So it was very much a question of a very large-scale organisation, to get the children out of Germany, because although the Germans were still in that kind of pre-genocidal stage, they were certainly not that helpful in allowing the children to leave. And that meant that the Jewish agencies in Germany, many of whom did not survive the Holocaust, were fundamentally involved in the rescue of these children. And I do my best in the book to illustrate the names of some of these forgotten, mainly women, again, who were involved on the German side of the rescue. What I thought I'd do, though, rather than keep rabbiting on, is to give you one or two excerpts, as you like, from the book that kind of give you a flavour of the sorts of things that I discovered. And before I do that, though, I should have done this at the beginning, I'm going to steal a rather TV kind of trick that Esther Ransom did in that 1988 That's Life programme. This wasn't my idea. I think, Tim, are you here? It was this idea from Anne Frank Trust. He said, why do you do it tonight? I've not thought about this. So if your family took in a Kindertransport child, would you please stand up? Now, as I'll say, I was going to say this at the end, but maybe I'll say it now, is that I think this might be the first time we've had under one roof the families of those who took in the Kinder. And I'm hoping that we've sown the seed for that, because their histories are really important to hear and to learn from, pluses and possibly problems and challenges that they had and so on. We need the full story. So let me just talk a little bit about some of the people that I focus on in the book. I'm going to start with, on page 51 of the book, if I can find it in a minute. I'm going to start with Lord Alan Sainsbury, maybe not a name you wouldn't expect to be associated with the Kindertransport. In late 1938 or early 39, Alan Sainsbury, head of the famous grocery chain, was having dinner with friends and family. They were discussing the terrible situation for Jews in Germany. Suddenly, Alan banged his fist on the table and said, "Why don't we do something about it?" Alan Sainsbury, who later pioneered self-service supermarkets in the UK, was a man of action and not just words. There and then, he and his brother Robert put their heads together and decided to sponsor a group of child refugees from the German Reich. Not only this, but they would acquire a large house and create a special hostel for the young exiles. This was the beginning of the so-called Sainsbury Home for Jewish refugee children in Putney. And I go on and obviously talk more about the Sainsbury link. And it's not untypical of the generosity of someone like Alan Sainsbury that support for those children, about 25 boys and girls, most I think from children's homes in Germany, went on all the way through the war and beyond. You know, he would be invited to their bar and bat mitzvahs, and he would send them wedding presents and this kind of thing way into the future. So that was one example of someone that I wouldn't have expected to have a link with the Kindertransport. Somebody else, they're all my favourites, of course, in the book, but it is a chap called Brigadier General Sir Wyndham Deeds. Marvellous name. If you go to Jerusalem, near the old city, but in the German colony part of Jerusalem, there is a little street called the Rehov Wyndham Deeds, in a kind of rather nightmarish spelling of his name, but still, you know, they've had a go at it. So this is about Wyndham Deeds. Born wealthy in a castle, dying poor in a lonely bedsit. Once ruled Palestine, devout Christian, ardent Zionist, battler for the East End poor, and a central figure in the Kindertransport. Not a bad CV, though it tells only a fraction of the story of a man once called Wyndham Bey by the Ottoman Turks. Described by Norman Bentwich, a close friend, as a modern saint, the life of Brigadier General Wyndham Deeds is more remarkable for the way in which this great figure's name has been lost. And if you remember, I said that there were some precedents to the Kindertransport. In 1937, we had the Spanish Kindertransport, but in 1936, there was a small-scale Kindertransport had been created called the Interaid Committee, which took in several hundred children from Germany to Britain. Wyndham Deeds was the chair of that committee. He was very much the moving force behind it. And when the London Committee was set up in 1938 for the Kindertransport, you can guess who was chosen to be the leader of that committee, Wyndham Deeds, because he had fantastic organisational ability, and because he was a bit of an aristocrat, he had access to the Home Office and Foreign Office and so on. A very highly respected figure, gave away all of his wealth, spends his last years living in Bow, helping poor from the East End, and dying in a poor bedsit, pretty much alone. So I thought if anyone deserves to be remembered, surely it's Brigadier General Sir Wyndham Deeds. I also want to now go on to page 93. I've got a chapter, which again might come as a surprise to you, called The Holiday Camp Manager. And I don't know if you know that when the first wave of children came on the Kindertransport in early December 1938, it was such a short time between then and the pogrom that brought about this exile that there really wasn't time to find foster homes for the children. And so Helen Bentwich and her London committee had this brilliant idea of renting a holiday camp, which was closed because it was winter. But the holiday camp had 800 beds in it, and it was 2 miles from the Harwich quayside. So what better place to bring the children in, and in an emergency, take them to live temporarily, of course, in a holiday camp. Okay, it wasn't heated and it was the worst winter of the century. That wasn't their fault. But at least they had somewhere to stay and somewhere to live. The manager of the holiday camp was Mr. Frank Bond. And I'm very delighted to see Frank Bond's granddaughter take another. It was a summer, I'm going to quote, it was a summer facility offering around 1,000 beds, 800 actually. The camp, one of 4 such pre-war holiday camps developed by the innovative leisure entrepreneur and former artillery officer, Captain Harry Warner. Some of you may remember the Warner holiday camps. It had been hired to house the first cohorts of Kindertransport children, and it was conveniently only 20 minutes from the port of Harwich. It was here that they made the acquaintance of Frank Bond, the camp's nattily dressed manager, an associate of Warner's business colleague and rival Billy Butlin. It was Frank Bond and his wife who welcomed them to England. And actually there is, it's there, if you go on YouTube, there's a rare newsreel footage of the very first day that the children arrive in Dovercourt, and those of us who know what Frank looked like can see him there chatting to the children in the dining room where they're having their first meal. And at the very end of the period, when the camp was closed in March, end of March 39, the remaining boys who were left in the camp, older boys for whom homes couldn't be easily found, wrote an amazing thank you card to Mr. and Mrs. Bond, thanking them for looking after them so well. This card, which is about this big, is here in this museum upstairs in their Kindertransport display. And maybe you get a chance to see it, I don't know. Yeah, yes, and it was found in Mr. and Mrs. Bond's house, I think by Mandy. It was just, they left it up in the attic because they were fearful of a German invasion. And because it's got the names of all the boys signed on the bottom of the card. So I thought that was definitely something that should be in the book. Another person I wanted to just read out very briefly was that of, which I call in the book, One Household, Two Rescuers. Slightly Shakespearean somehow there, but I'm not sure where I got that from. Sybil and Robert Hutton were both members of the Cambridge Refugee Committee. I know a lot about this because I live in Cambridge, and the Cambridge Refugee Committee archives are still pretty much intact, very rare, but they are there to be studied. And Mrs. Hutton, Sybil Hutton, was one of the prime movers in running the Refugee Committee in Cambridge. And this is how I start the book. My whole house here is working night and day on refugee problems, mainly for children, for which we are concerned, and for academic people, professional, commercial, and industrial cases. Thus wrote Robert Salmon Hutton, Goldsmith Professor of Metallurgy, in a letter in the 17th of June 39. Robert and his wife Sybil were exemplary rescuers, passionately concerned for the welfare of those fleeing persecution. They not only found homes for those children, but where homes could not be found, opened up their own home to refugee children who otherwise would not find a loving home. And I'm very delighted and privileged to say that one of the children that was taken in by Sybil Hutton and became a lifelong member of the family is here with us today. And she's in the book. Laurie, take a stand. And doubly delighted to say that Mrs. Hutton's grandson is all, and great-grandson here as well. The Cambridge Refugee Committee, for which I know quite a bit about, because I've done my research on it, was responsible, we think, for about 800 children, not just in Cambridge, but they had responsibility for the whole of the east of England. And Mrs. Hutton and her partner in crime, as it were, Mrs. Burkill, reckoned that 2,000 children came through their books through that period. Now, this is just one city, one region of the UK, and this is replicated all across Britain. A couple of more just quick responses. On going back to Dovercourt, I've written a chapter here called The Homemaker, and it's based on the work of a lady called Mary Hughes. Mary Hughes was the hospitality secretary for the York Refugee Committee. Mrs. Hughes was a very active Quaker, and we know, don't we, that Quakers played such a key role in the rescue of the children. Mary Hughes was a quiet but determined rescuer who not only found homes for many children, but also took into her own home in York 2 young, very unhappy refugees and their desperate mother. And then the whole story about how those 2 refugees first came to Dovercourt, were sent to a very, very abusive family. Well, not abusive, but sort of, neglectful family. 2 little children, brother and sister. They came back to Dovercourt, and luckily, they came to the attention of a man called David Hughes. He's a young man, 18, who was running the post office as a volunteer. He was an undergraduate from Cambridge, and of course the son of Mary Hughes, York Refugee Committee. And the story is, because I met David many, many years later, told me that he saw these very unhappy children, picked up the phone at Dovercourt and said to his mother Mary, 2 very unhappy children, could we take them in? Yes, of course, darling, put them on the next train. Off they went, and there they stayed with the Hughes family, ostensibly for the rest of their lives. So I'm also really delighted to say that although David has passed on, he lived up to the age of 101 a couple of years ago, but we do have his daughter in the audience. So let's... Do you want to say something into the mic?
I'd just like to say how very proud I am of my granny, who I didn't know. I was a baby when she died, and my father, who died aged 101. And thank you, Mike, for putting his story on record. I just wish he was here tonight.
So do we. Just a couple more to share with you. This one, chapter 12, is called The Shopkeeper. Overton, Rugby, England. So many letters from desperate Jewish parents in Germany were addressed in this way that the postal service knew exactly where to deliver them. Robert Allen Overton was a shopkeeper from Rugby and a devout Christadelphian who dedicated his considerable energies to helping Jewish children fleeing from Nazi persecution. He was the founder and honorary secretary of the Rugby Refugee Committee and organised foster homes for up to 250 Jewish refugee children, and where the homes were not forthcoming, set up 2 Jewish hostels, Elpis Lodge in Edgbaston, a suburb of Birmingham, and Littlethorne in Rugby. Those 2 hostels throughout the war provided a safe and happy home for many teenage refugee boys in particular. And again, I think I'm very delighted to welcome Jane, who is Alan Overton's daughter. Granddaughter, sorry. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm also very proud of my grandfather. We've known it within our family that he did this great work, saved over 250 children. But it's something he never spoke about. He felt it was something that he didn't want to talk about. He didn't want to be rewarded for it in any way or to make anything of it. Thank you very much for allowing me to share some family anecdotes and some of the history of what he did, and hopefully I want to do more now and write about his work and what he did, because this is all really important for the next generation.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. I'm going to finish with chapter 20 called The Rabbi, Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schonfeld. If ever the epithet of a one-person British rescuer applied to the pantheon of helpers during the 30s refugee crisis, it was Rabbi Solomon Schonfeld. Eschewing the bureaucracy of committees and the niceties of diplomacy, he was driven by one overriding passion: to save as many of his fellow Jews as possible, and in the quickest way possible. He risked his life many times travelling to Nazi Germany and Austria, first to secure the escape of Orthodox rabbis and scholars, and then to organise what was effectively known as the Schonfeld Kindertransport for hundreds of children. No one's been able to really tally how many children, but possibly up to 700 children, mainly from Vienna. Schonfeld, if there are any filmmakers in the audience, please, this is a fantastic story. He is the epitome of Jewish chutzpah. He tried every trick he could think of to get as many people out as quickly as possible. Not for him, these other committees, like Helen Bentwich's and so on, or the German agencies. He did everything himself because he kind of didn't trust anybody else to do it. And there are many, many fantastic stories about Schonfeld. I think my favourite is not a Kindertransport story, actually, but I do put it in the book, that in 1943, when it was really absolutely clear that the final solution was well underway, it's certainly not true to say no one knew. Everyone knew by the end of 42. And we knew about Auschwitz, they knew about Treblinka, they knew about the gas chambers, they knew about all those things. And Schonfeld was prescient enough to know about the fate of the Hungarian Jews, who were the last big population yet to be murdered. And so he went up to Manchester to meet a kind of rich businessman that he knew, Mr. Levy, and asked him to give him £10,000. In 1943, that was a lot of money. Levy gave him the £10,000, and what did Schonfeld do with it? What would you do with it? He bought a Caribbean island. And he bought the island not because he wanted to go on holiday, but because it was a British part of a British possession. And his scheme was that all the Jews of Hungary would become honorary citizens of this Caribbean island, and thus might provide them with a little extra protection, diplomatically. It was an audacious scheme which had a lot of supporters, but sadly the government were not included in that list of supporters. Anthony Eden said, great idea, but it would mean negotiating with the Nazis, which we're not prepared to do. And so I don't know what he did with the island, but that's one of many, many audacious things that Rabbi Schonfeld did. So I kind of finished the Kindertransport section, finished the book in fact, with his story, because it is the most outrageous but inspiring story in a way, and set of stories. So really that kind of concludes everything I have to say. I was asked by the organisers if I would take some questions. If you could keep them short, because some of us haven't had the bagels yet.
Could you read on page 103? It was in the 1990s.
103, 1990s. Did I write that? I don't remember. Oh yes, this is going back to Mandy's story. Okay, so this is the Frank Bond story. It was in the 1990s that Mandy received a call from the Jewish Museum in London. A lady searching her attic in Dovercourt found a huge postcard signed by many foreign names. Not knowing what to do with it, she offered it to the museum. Staff then traced Mandy, who identified the object as a thank you card to her grandfather and grandmother back in late March 1939. And the words said, a token of appreciation for Mr. and Mrs. Bond for all that they have done for us during our stay in the holiday camp, from the German refugee children.
That is the key to the door of the house.
Oh, that's the key to the door of the house where the postcard was found.
The postcard was
Wow.
found.
See, history in the making.
That's my most precious memory from my father, the Dovercourt key ring.
Yes, we have a picture of
Everything else
it.
Dovercourt, it's in there.
It's in the book.
It is, it's like-
Yes,
Dovercourt
yes,
key ring, it's that big.
Yeah.
He carried it. He said, I asked him. He carried the Dovercourt chalet keyring for the
It
rest
was
of
on
his
his
life.
key ring for the rest of his life.
Mike,
Did he show it to
you
you?
and I saw it.
We did.
We went to see
He
it.
showed it to you.
So okay, there's lots to talk about. We could go on for many hours, but we'll better. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
If I remember correctly, I haven't yet had time to check it in your book, there were a number of rather remarkable people who came on the trains to the and across on the ferries to the UK,
Yes.
and then had the courage and the honour to return to Germany when they'd given their word.
Yes.
Would you speak? I mean, that's an amazing thing to do. The parallels with today's world are very striking.
Yes.
I just wonder whether you could give a little bit of information so
Yes.
everyone goes away with that story.
Well, the Germans made it very clear that although the children were allowed chaperones to come to England through Holland and on the trains, that those chaperones had to go back. But of course, you know, they were urged by the British committees often not to do that, to stay in England and be safe. But many of them said, I'll give you one example, it's in the book. Hannah Kaminski was one of the, she was the leader of the German League of Women, Jewish German League of Women, and she was a very regular chaperone on those trains. And she refused to go back because she refused to stay because she said there are more children to bring out. And so she would go back, she would bring to English, go back, bring to English, and many others did. Most of those chaperones never survived. Because of course, in the 1st of September 1939, Poland was invaded and all the borders were closed, so no more trains were allowed. So yeah, thank you for, that's a very important piece of history, yes. Eric Reich.
I came as a 4-year-old and I was looked after by refugees
That's true.
who came from Sudetenland. Now, what is Sudetenland? The German-speaking Czechoslovakia, which of course Hitler went in first. Very similar to today's world.
Yep.
Furthermore, I happen to be the chairman of the Kindertransport. We had a reunion to which Richard Attenborough came.
Because
I then rang up David Attenborough and he came on a Zoom with us. Now, what is very interesting, Richard said, and his book, you can read it at some point or the other, his parents said, we'll take in 2 girls from the Kindertransport. But remember, everything is divided by 5, but not 3. The other one was Jonathan. And Richard said, well, what could we say? We said, yes, of course, no problem. They went, both the girls, there were 2 girls, they went to America, and one of them came back with a boy in tow. Why? He wanted the blessing of, she wanted the blessing of the Attenboroughs to get married. Now remember, the Attenboroughs are not Jewish.
I'm not
Those
related.
were. The boy, I have no idea.
Oh,
But they keep in touch. And the important thing is, that's what it's all about. Know that we help each other. Things happen, change, unfortunately, and I know there are lots of monuments everywhere, but it's not for the Kindertransport monument, it's for the refugees. It's for the people that today need help. Not
course.
those who need it. Just one more thing. If anybody is interested, you can read the Mr. Noel Baker gave a speech in Parliament in October 1938, just before Kristallnacht. And what he said was, why doesn't the government agree? Now, he was Labour, of course. Why doesn't the government agree to the 10,000 children the Jews want to bring in? And because of that, the government changed their mind and brought in 10,000 children, of which I was one of them.
thank you. So Eric, you didn't mention another very interesting part about his history, that he was also under the wing, as it were, of the chairman of, as they were called in those days, the chairman of the Dorking and Area Refugee Committee. The chairman of the Dorking Refugee Committee was none other than Ralph Vaughan Williams, the English composer who was always top of the class
Whose
together.
great uncle was Charles Darwin.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
So next time you hear the lark ascending, there's a link. Any more questions? One more? Yes?
Just an anecdote that I knew Rabbi Schoenfeld quite well, and the story goes that in 1943 he had to go urgently abroad on kinder business, but he only received the message on Shabbat.
Oh, so you can.
So he walked from his home in Stamford Hill on Shabbat afternoon to get the first flight out of Heathrow to go there.
Wow. Wow. In 1943 as well. Yeah. One of many, many wonderful anecdotes about him. I think one more or two more. Oh, yes.
Mike, thank you very much for that fascinating introduction to the book.
Thank you.
That I'm really looking forward to reading.
Good.
I'm involved with World Jewish Relief, which was the Central British Fund.
Yes.
Which played a big role in bringing the Kinder over. But bearing in mind the focus of tonight, I hope that no one will mind if I just inform you that on Wednesday evening, Jewish News is hosting an online event, a refugee information event, where there will be a panel of representatives from World Jewish Relief, Citizens UK, JRAN, and refugees at home to explore specifically what happens next for people looking to take in refugees at the moment and what's involved before and during the process, and how people may be able to help refugees here even if they can't find their homes.
Thank you.
So 8 o'clock Wednesday evening online. I'm sorry there's no flyer out about it yet, but there will be very soon, and I think it will be of interest to people.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So, I think unless there are any more thoughts or questions,
Say something.
I mean, just that point. Sorry, just one point about the WJR, of course, is that hopefully somebody will be shortly writing a book on get the children out, the Ukrainian story and the Syrian story, because those books need to be written as well.
Thank you, Mike. Fascinating. The stories are just absolutely incredible. I know you started out by saying everyone was individual. The groups, people didn't want to get involved in, obviously talk about committees, but nationally or collectively. But is there anywhere in these stories whereby there is a collective understanding of the Jewish community or interfaith communities, churches and synagogues, actually engaging together? And finally, if it were coordinated, in hindsight, could there have been a better excess of people coming out? So in other words, if there were a body, deputies, etc., that could have engaged, would there have been more people?
Thank you. Well, one of the genius ideas that Helen Bentwich had, and I'm sure some of her colleagues as well, was to put all the refugee agencies under one roof. This was Bloomsbury House in Bloomsbury Square, just off Bloomsbury Street, a former hotel. And they had the nous to put the Jewish, the Christian, the Quaker, the non-denominational refugee agencies under one roof. And that, of course, pre-internet, meant that the coordination was as efficient as it possibly could be. So rather than having this kind of fractured into lots of different vested interests, they all came under one. And I think that was partly why everything was done so quickly and so efficiently. In Bloomsbury House, talk about this, was kept going really until about 1947 as a refugee first point of contact for finding jobs, for finding homes, for giving out emergency monies to people who had no other source of income. And so I think the coordination was astonishing. And very early on, particularly Helen Bentwich, I think, is responsible here, came up with the idea that the refugee committees should be non-denominational, should be, or at least certainly cross-denominational, which is kind of why Schonfeld didn't really like the committee very much. But I think the mainstream view was that it should be multi-faith and multi-denominational. In fact, the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time took a very important role, as did Bishop Bell, who I talk about in the book. So it was very much a cross-faith and no-faith effort. And I think actually, it was a response, as we have now, to the horror of what was going on in Germany. So if you've got horror and you've got well-organised people, something should come out of it, hopefully.
Right, we're going to just hear two more things.
Two more, okay.
My
Sure.
name's John Alderdice from Belfast, as you can probably hear. I'm living over here, but my hearty congratulations on this book. And the timing of the publication of it is quite extraordinary and inspired, given what's going on with Ukraine. The only connection that I have to the book, as you know, is that of an Irish theologian, J. Ernest Davy.
Mm-hmm.
Davy was the principal of the Presbyterian Theological College in Belfast, and his closest friend, actually, was Rabbi Shachter, who was the Jewish rabbi, and they would meet every week to go through Hebrew texts and to compare them with each other and so on. He's passed away many years ago. His son and his two daughters have passed away, but before his daughter Joy died, she was telling the story to a colleague who was writing about David. And her story was this: they would go to bed as children at night, mum, dad, the three children, and they would wake up in the morning and there would be 2 or 3 or 4 families in the house. And they were, because he was the chairman of the Belfast Committee for German Refugees. And they would come in and they would be there for a day or two. And she said, when the families arrive, the difference that I did with Dad at breakfast time is he put a kippah on. This was the principle of the theological college. Because the Presbyterians all felt great kinship with Jewish people, psalm singers, and people who valued the Old Testament as we would describe it. One of the more positive stories, perhaps, from Belfast in a time of difficulty. And it's important, as you say, to remember that this is something that people of all faiths and none can work together on, particularly in this time of crisis. Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, my pleasure.
I supported your work in lots of areas that we've done it. I just want to say that one of the issues that slowed down the number of children that come over on the Kindertransport, even from Czechoslovakia and from Germany and from Austria, was money. And there are letters which during mid-1939 which says, look, we're running out of money, we can't bring it anymore, we got to slow it down, we got to stop it. We can't do this anymore. So you can see that money plays a big role in all this, and even now. And so I just want to say that you see all this fundraising, and it really makes a difference. So
Thank you.
just want to throw that out.
No, that's good.
It's out. I think that's it. I mean, people, there's always going to be more questions, aren't there? Judy, shout it out, and then go on. I don't like to deprive people of a
I was just
question.
going to say that
Oh, sorry, Mary.
was there any input at all from any of the government departments, or was this all done by volunteers?
Well, up to September 39, we're talking about the outbreak of war, the only inputs, apart from obviously there was still an issue about visas from those older young people and adults who needed visas to come in. Visas had been introduced, especially in 1938, to stem the flow, as they saw it, of Jewish refugees. So they'd been introduced for the first time in many, many years. So you had visa departments that were involved in a negative way, I guess. Not in terms of any kind of cooperation, except the government was very keen or very interested in health.
Yeah.
So the Ministry of Health was wanting to know who was here, what diseases they were bringing in, were they being isolated if they had those diseases. So I would say the most kind of involvement was from health issues. Transmissible diseases. They were terrified that these foreign children might be bringing in all sorts of things that we Brits didn't know much about. So that's and a lot of the records and documents of that time are Ministry of Health documents, which is frustrating because we want to know the other documents, where have they gone? But yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Just because of time.
Yeah, sure.
Just, I think, first of all, I just wanted to thank Mike very, very much. And I guess I say thank you to some other people as well, to Sue. Thank you so much, Oliver, as well, and everybody that's got this in some sort of motion for us.